This episode of the Psyched to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives. Hello and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
And today we wanted to talk about, something that I think really anyone who has gone on Psychology Today, anyone who has tried to market themselves as a professional, as well as anyone who's gone through the experience of trying to figure out who is my demographic, who do I work well with, is going to be able to relate to. And that's really just making sure we find this sweet spot in kind of our clinical profession and making sure we're communicating that effectively.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting. We oftentimes, I think, find ourselves when we're in, supervision or when we're consulting with peers, we tend to talk about the cases that aren't going well,
yes,
or those tough cases, which is great. I mean, I think we learn a lot from those. But I do think it's kind of also interesting. What does it look like to really find those successes? And how do we understand when we have successes, why we have those successes with individuals? And then how do we leverage that? Not only to, I think, for more refined referrals, but I think also for marketing. Like, you said, like Psychology Today, like there's a million ways people write those, their information on their bios. But are they really reflective of what we're good at?
Yeah. And, I thinking back to, my first role as an outpatient clinician, and I was given this checkbox list of, what demographic are you working with? Right. And it was, ages, it was diagnosis, it was, just kind of specific areas of focus. And I remember I was like, all right, so when are they going to explain this to me? And I was like, all right, yep, we just need this back. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, no. Right. I don't know that I was really prepared for who I work well with. And so inevitably I put way more boxes than I should have. And I got exposed to, and it was great exposure,
right?
But it wasn't really refined. I really wasn't able to, I think, provide the best service to all of those individuals, but it did provide that opportunity to start to figure out, okay, who am I as a clinician? And I think that's an important discovery. And I think every clinician has their own experience of that, but it's something we really need to start talking about, because you're right. It's wonderful to know the cases that we're struggling with, and that's good feedback and information, but we also need to know, who am I for?
Right.
And not just, for the tailored caseload piece, but also just to feel a sense of satisfaction and purpose and meaning. And we're in this field for a reason. And if we're being, we might have phenomenal clinical skills, but if we're continuing to apply that to a population we don't connect with, then we're not going to see that kind of accurate reflection of truly what our skill is and, how we're able to really affect change in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like, so in some ways, I look at this episode as kind of flipping clinical supervision on its head to some extent and kind of going, let's talk about the opposite. So when I did supervision a lot, which I don't do as much, of course, now, but, I would oftentimes talk with those in supervision about the concept of positive deviance, and positive deviance being this idea that how do we study what's going well in sessions, and then how do we replicate that? So it's again, we learn a lot from our mistakes, but that idea of really kind of setting back and paying attention to those positive details. And again, I think over time, it's how we do develop, I think, an expertise. And when we're comfortable in it, we also can, I hate to use the word sell it, but we can sell it. Like
Yeah.
there's a marketing piece of it where when I talk about something that I'm excited about, people know that I'm excited about it. So even in treatment, like there are certain things that just I love. Like I love doing it. So I'm much more passionate. You know, I found out early in my career, I'm not a good couples therapist. Like that's not my thing. And if I mean, I've done it. I've had to do it as part of jobs, but I never could market myself around that very well because I never found it comfortable. I never, I have the skill. I know the modalities, but my personal kind of my personality is just not great for it. So yeah, I think this is a cool topic because I don't know that we talk about it enough.
No. And, with that, I think it's important that we stop and reflect on, certainly our background. What are the modalities that we have been taught, that we have, going back even to, early episode with Bob Friedberg, he talked about, I don't want my postdoc students going and coming up with a brand new theory. So ground yourself in the theory.
Be good, right?
But once you know it, make the theory your own. And I think that was actually your quote from that episode.
Yeah, I don't know if Bob said it or I'd love to take credit for it, but I mean, he may have said it, but yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's part of it, right? How do we ground ourselves? I mean, it's interesting. I've said to people, I don't think success in therapy is often accidental. Like when we have success, there's probably a reason. And I kind of in my head kind of reflect on things like alignment. So clinicians that are theoretical approach. Do we know the theory and do we understand that piece of it? Interpersonal style. Did we make it our own? That piece of it. How do we make it? And then client readiness to that piece of it, because we can have great theories and we can be the nicest person in the world and make all these unique things, but does it meet the person where it's at? And I think that's when we find really good success. I think those things align, like it's the star alignment that kind of happens. But we have to think of all of those things when we do this. It has to be kind of deliberate.
And, I think it's crucial then that, we as clinicians are constantly reflecting, and also in our early case, or in our early sessions when we're working with a new client, is assessing them for that fit, assessing kind of what their needs are, what they're coming in looking for. You'll have some clients I think do a great job of self-identifying that. Sure. And you have some like, I'm just here because like my boss tells me to show up, or my wife tells me. Right. And there's going to be two very different approaches from the person who's like, I'm here. This is what I want to change. Yeah. This is what I've done. And I've gotten up to this point and I'm looking to work with you to take it to this next step. That is wonderful. But if that next step also doesn't feel within our scope or within our reach, so again, and it's important for us to have those conversations of identifying what it is, like, those individuals we're serving, what are they looking to get out of this? And are assessing also, are we the best fit as well? Or if not, how do we approach referrals and those pieces there? So, it's this large conversation. And I don't know that there's any one way of doing it, but I do know that not paying attention to it, probably a way that we're not supposed to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I think you used the word reflection, and I think that's kind of how I've always looked at it. I've kind of tried to make sure, and I think you get better with this over time. Like I think probably my first few years, I was just trying to keep a caseload. Like I just wanted to keep a job. Like that was so. If they said, "Hey, you got to see that," yeah, great, I'll do it. And I'm grateful for those opportunities. I think I learned a lot from it. But I think as we mature in any human service field, I think that then we hit this point of slow down, and then we hit this point of kind of as you kind of said, reflection. So like for me, like I now pause and always sit like, what did I do well? Now, talk about this maybe in a little bit, but a lot of times I even ask the clients, like, how was this for you? Like, what, and I want their feedback. Like, why do they think that we're being successful? And And I've learned a lot from listening to that. Sometimes I ask myself, like, how would I define the client? Like, and again, not to make it too clinical, but sometimes it's like, I actually sometimes find that I'm the best with people who don't come in ready for action, which sounds odd. Like, so we think of like the readiness to change kind of, or stages of change theory, this idea of, some people are in the action phase. They come in, they're distressed, they want to feel better. But I actually think I do better if I start with someone at that pre-contemplation stage. Like, they're not even sure if they have a problem, but somebody else has told them they did, and that's why they're here. Whether it's a mom, dad, or boss or whatever, like you said. Like, I find that helps. For some reason, I'm better at building relationships and building momentum with those folks. But I know that's not for everybody. Like, I think a lot of people are like, hey, like, I'm good when people come in and say, hey, I want to do this. And I actually find that it's harder for me in those moments. Like, I think it's going to be easy, but it's not. So what was the client? My other things are, I look at conditions. Like, were there things that we did in our session that added to the experience? I don't know, I think storytelling, you had mentioned before we kind of started, like, sometimes I'm really good at storytelling. Other times it's not so good. But what are those conditions? So like, I think that it's like, that's the reflection part. Like, afterward, do we just write our clinical note? Yeah, we have to. It's an ethical obligation.
Yeah.
But then do we also set back and reflect on it? I had a supervisor, God, many, many years ago, like, 25 years ago, who we talked about writing a success log. So like, as part of my supervision, it was writing down what went well, reflect on the session, kind of look at it. I honestly don't do it much now, like, but I do pause and think about it. Like, I think so we have to somehow do the reflection.
And I think it can even be in an unstructured format. And so I know personally, something that my wife has done a great job of bringing attention is like, I'll come in, after a 10-hour day and like, I'm like, I have an upbeat, like, I'm like kind of have this like pep in my step kind of feeling. And she's like, oh, like, was it a good day? And like that kind of prompt there, it's like, it's a really good therapy day, and like, I felt like it was really effective. Like, I really got this across. And like, I don't know that I would have paused and attended to that because I'm just kind of going from one thing to the next. Sure. But that moment of, today I did good work. And like being able to have that reflection and thinking about, well, why, what happened? Like, and what was my role within that? And I think, as a clinician early on, I really never wanted to take any ownership over change. And it's like, it's not me, it's you when it came to the clients. But now it's not me, it's not you, it's us working together and finding a good fit. It's, you're the expert in you, I'm the expert in the material, and we're coming together to create effective change. And really being able to take ownership over our role, I think, is an important piece. And it's something I struggled with as a clinician early on. Yeah. And it's not to take full credit either. It's not like, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's, humility is important, but don't be so humble that you starve.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, and I think there, research pans that out a bit too. Like, I mean, John Norcross and some other folks have done research about, I think, the role of therapists. And, why is it that we can have two therapists that give a similar, if not even the same, standardized treatment and get a different outcome? There is something about us as therapists, and I don't think that is that I'm the end all be all, but I do like the idea of goodness of fit. Yeah. Like, I think I am the right person for the right people. Yeah. And there are some people, I am their oil to their vinegar. Like, it's just not not going to be it's just not the right fit. And that's okay. Like, I mean, I think that's that idea of like, when we know ourselves, it lets us accept the referrals that we I think feel we can do the best with. And it also lets us know when we need to refer out. And I think that's important. Like, I think it's important for us to know that. But so I guess I'm kind of curious, like I kind of threw out some like reflection questions, but I guess like as you process, Paul, like for you, like, so let's talk about clients, maybe for like the client factors. Like, what are things that you like, when you think about that, what about clients do you think about to determine if they're a good fit for you?
So I would say that pre-contemplation, going back to like your comment there, that's not my forte, but contemplation to preparation, I think I really get, and especially like on the cusp of contemplation and being able to come in as someone who kind of maybe pulls them into that preparation stage. I think that like, that's a really good sweet spot for me where when they're already starting to get some momentum and really being able to then like kind of giving them that permission and encouraging them to take that risk in a way of like, hey, like, let's give this a try. And then we get into the preparation of what is this going to look like and some of those pieces there.
So the readiness to change piece you think about. Me too. Like I said, mine was kind of the Art Freeman and Mike Dolan did some research years ago, and they added 2 earlier phases, anti-contemplation and non-contemplation.
Oh, okay.
So one that you don't even know that you have a problem and one that you're really resisting. I do sometimes feel like that's my starting point. I don't know that I like to admit that, but I do kind of like, I like when people kind of go, it's everybody else. No, I like the others as well, but I think so readiness to change, or the idea of stages of change. I agree. I think that's a really important one. Yeah. What else? What other client things kind of pop out for you?
And I think especially when clients are coming in and they're able to demonstrate self-reflection, but their self-reflection is missing key pieces. So when they're coming in, they're like, I've been told I'm lazy and I must be lazy because of this. I've been told I don't care because of this. I'm ineffective or I'm not intelligent. And being able to also challenge them in that sense. So being able to say, okay, yes, that could be true, but let's look, and especially for my ADHD clients, but also, for others as well, like, let's look at a different lens or let's look at a different approach and working to generate excitement. So when there's this self-reflective quality, but they keep just not really getting to this point of creating effective change and being able to then spark curiosity. So I find, I guess on the opposite end, when clients struggle with curiosity, I really struggle with, but to be effective with them. And because a lot of what I do is I push, I prod, like I question, and I'm like, I'm going to play devil's advocate. And like, I can't tell you the number of eye rolls that happen. And yet at the end, like, they're like, okay, yeah, no, like you're making a good point. So, and that, like that being able to hold and attend to differing perspectives and being willing to challenge that for themselves, they know what their goals are. They know what change they want, but the way that they're going isn't effective. And so when we can kind of create this almost, here's a different path that maybe we were looking over, and maybe it's really simple. Maybe it's going to be it's going to be an uphill path, but you already know what you tried. So like that sense in that, going back to that again, that willingness piece.
Yeah. So I think that, so like if I'm hearing like, so what that other client variable is where they are on their own reflection or introspection of like kind of being able to process it, which I think is good. Like I think I'm kind of the same way. Like for me, not that I can't do just supportive counseling, but I would say that for me, like I'm an action person. I think that's just the CBT mindset for me. So I think this idea that action doesn't mean they have to make changes immediately, but they're willing to dialogue about it. Like it's, I think that I like that reflection piece. I think that's a good one for us. Like, I think for people to think through of what is that like group that I'm going to do, better with. Yeah. And then that is another one. And
another thing that this is, I guess, a bit of that readiness to change piece as well. But I ask this a lot in my intakes, and I'll usually kind of shotgun it in at various points. But the idea of the miracle question, and so like, do they have it? Do they even have an answer to that? And like, usually I'll explain what it is, and I'll throw it out, and they're like, I don't know, man. Like this is a first session. But I'm like, I completely understand that. Even like there's times where I'll return back to that. I was like, hey, like after this, like, you have any answers for that yet? And then being able to say, like, what is that change and how do we know when we're done? And I think when they're starting to figure that out, that lets me know that we're heading in the right direction. And there's individuals that we just and don't ever have an answer. And so again, back to that self-reflection, looking at, is there something that I'm doing or that I'm not doing that's creating a barrier for them with that?
Right.
Or trying to assess, is this more for them? And again, it's just about accuracy. It's not about, it has to be me, it has to be them. Yeah. It could be both, but like just trying to better understand and constantly, I think, assessing in a way, but doing it so that we're not spending too much time assessing, because I think we can over assess and that can create its own issues and concerns there.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I've said this name now a few times, so we'll probably have to put something in the show notes about some of his stuff, but I'm going to go back to John Norcross, who I find to be just a pretty brilliant researcher and clinician. And, and he's part of the whole readiness to change piece. But the other thing is, like, he talks a lot about the goodness of fit of therapist and client. And one of the things I learned from him many years ago was asking about communication style. So like asking, like, and I do this. I mean, I sit down in my first session, I get to know people. And as I kind of wrap it up, I usually will ask, I'll be like, okay, so like, let's talk about what is a good fit for you. Like, do you think you do better in therapy where somebody's more direct with you? Or do you want somebody who's more kind of reflective and supportive? Like, what's a better communication style for you? So their fit of communication. Now, I'm pretty comfortable with both, but I know that I am more direct than I am on the other end. Like I can be very direct when I talk, and that's something I have to be then aware of. I ask things like, are you a person that wants to come up with ideas that you're going to try between sessions? Or is that going to be hard for you to do? Because that action piece is a good, like, for me, I'm more successful with people who will do between session work of whatever that may be, whether it's journaling, whether it's just some behavioral experiments. I'm better with that. I'm impatient when we're not doing that. Like, it's like, okay, like let's move this. But I have to know that for my personality and see. So like those are, I think, other two. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions client wise that I kind of go through my head, but I do ask those as part of my intake, basically. And
one thing is, to your point there of like that kind of homework side of things that can come up in therapy. I think that's, again, like I know personally, there was a significant amount of time where I was really diligent in trying to assign homework and consistently, or I guess inconsistent with the follow-up and importance. And then getting the feedback of, why'd you have me do this? And if, like, you don't follow up. And then like, and so there's a self-reflection piece of like, all right, like, well, what is going on? And I like the idea of, instead of the homework being, okay, I need you to go do this, and like, this is what you're going to specifically be doing, translating that to like, let's do the homework in session and set you up. But now we're running an experiment of how well does it integrate in your daily life? And so if it's oftentimes I'm like, hey, pull out your phone, whatever calendar set, like, we're going to set up some reminders, and I want you to tell me, how does this work? Or, hey, here's an app, I want you to give this a try, and we're going to like set this up, and we're going to try to refine it. And so we're doing things that are going to help generalize these skills outside of session, but we're setting up the initial process there instead of me needing to recall that setup. Like, oh, hey, I need you to go set this up, and following up with them, because then it's already in process. Then it is much easier for me to pull into that and access that versus, hey, I assigned pages this through this in this workbook for you. How'd you do with it? That's not my forte. So I think, again, as a clinician, that's important, because there's a stretch of time where I was not being a very good, I was not following up well. Yeah. I think, again, good kind of reflection. For me, like, it's like, so I find that homework piece, I'm kind of more collaborative in like, okay, hey, what are you taking away from today's session? And what are some ideas that we can come up with together that you can practice it? And so I kind of make it
part of my session notes. So like the next time I go back, I do kind of go, oh yeah, like they're supposed to practice X, Y, and Z. But I do it more in a less of do this and more of how do you think you can implement it? So kind of maybe in the middle from where you're at to the idea of assigning, like I'm not a big workbook guy in general. Like that's just not my thing, but I am a practice guy. Like I'm kind of like, hey, let's practice it here. And then in what way can you do this next in between session? And then coming up with a follow-up. So, I mean, I think those are all, I think, good client factors that, like, again, I need to know that when, and we'll talk maybe about how we market, but if people look at things about me that have been written as far as like bios and stuff, it'll say like, it's about doing something this session. I'm not just a talk therapist. I'm an action therapist. That's a kind of a marketing piece for me. And so I think that's specific for client.
And I think one more thing that I think is an interesting, and it might just be kind of by the nature of the way I structure things, I run into this more frequently, but I need to catch myself from hanging on to the problem of the week. And I think that's often, or finding ways of translating that into the overarching area. And so that's something that self-reflection of my introduction, my standard introduction used to be, hey, how things been going since we last talked, which is great information. However, it then introduced, this happened. Okay. What's going on with that? And then, the focus that we had previously and the momentum we carried, we might be derailing that. And there might be important pieces there, but I want to spend, I'd like to call out that idea of the problem of the week and saying like, hey, is there anything that feels important for us to get to for today? If not, I want to make sure we're following up on this. So I kind of have adapted or changed my typical kind of scripted introduction that I want to hear those important factors, but I also want to call out, this is why we're here. Or at least this is why you've shared in the past why we're here. If we need to shift that focus, that's okay. But I don't want to inadvertently shift that by talking about what's going on in the immediate moment that might not have relevance in the next session.
Yeah. I think that's great. But I mean, isn't that like, it sounds like you've learned that from focusing on what's worked and when it was successful.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's like the whole gist of this kind of episode. I think this idea that as we reflect on, hey, I asked it this way, and when I do it, I get a different response. Yeah. And a better response. And, so I'm with you. I kind of avoid the tell me about your week kind of question. And a lot of times I'm kind of more of, all right, before we get into all the other stuff, tell me one good thing that's happened to you. Like, that's what I want to know. Like, just tell me one good thing. And everybody comes up with one good thing. Sometimes they don't, but for the most part, but that's kind of how I start, more just to set the tone a little bit. And then I kind of go into something very similar to you. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a good idea. But so I think the other piece, as we're thinking about the success, I mean, jumping to maybe therapeutic approach. I know, anybody that listens know that CBT is kind of my world. And I think, we talk about the CBT stuff quite a bit. But, there's a lot of very effective treatments. But I think as clinicians, understanding our identity within that. And I know it's not always a popular thing that I say, but I say when I present, the word eclectic always has bothered me therapeutically. I think we throw that around. And I think, from a marketing standpoint, how many people read somebody's bio and goes, oh, eclectic? That's they don't know what that means. So it's how do we define our therapeutic approach? For me, I hit on a couple of things. I view everything through a CBT lens. That's how I see individuals. I conceptualize in that way. I mean, that's just my view. But I also integrate things like motivational interviewing. That's important. So there's and again, that goes back to that readiness to change piece. Relationship is important. So a relational focus, which again, we talk about quite a bit. And then my other piece for my therapeutic approach is I'm integrative technically. So, although I don't like the word. I'm technically eclectic. Like, so I'm therapeutically sound and technically eclectic in the sense of I'm always viewing through a CBT lens. But listen, there's some really great strategies and techniques from other therapies that I can integrate in that lens, stay true to who I am. And I know they're better for that person. So, the simplest one I always use is, Gestalt therapy has created a lot of wonderful things. I pull in, empty chair techniques and how we utilize role play and things like that. Gestalt therapy has delivered that. That's a great way to use it. So, as I think of like how I talk about myself there from a therapeutic approach, those are the things I hit on. I mean, I don't know what's your thought?
I certainly think like making sure like refining down like that CBT focus, but especially like that behavioral intervention side of things. And so I talk again, my primary caseload, I would say, is ADHD individuals. And so talk about how, hey, we're not going to be focusing as much on the specific thoughts because it's the way that you are creating behaviors and habits and routines that is going to be the most effective in creating change. I do want to challenge the thoughts when it comes to the self-judgment, to the limitations that we put on ourselves, to the quick assessments or the quick assumptions of why things are happening the way they are. However, it's going to be far more effective for us to create behavioral interventions rather than stop and say, hey, let's think, what were you thinking about when you did this? Because the majority of the time the answer is like, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention, or I have no recollection of what that was.
Right.
But if we can talk about like, okay, well, what happened? What was the thing that then happened as a result of that? And what's our point of intervention that we can stick in there to help create a change in the outcome for you? And let's plan that. Let's habit stack. So let's look at what you're already doing and then let's break that down. So it is this really important reflective piece, but I think it's more behavioral reflective than it is cognitively reflective.
Yeah.
And so I try to share that piece. I don't know that I break it down quite like that, but that's what we're constantly doing in sessions. Also for larger topics, I really like pulling from, and I wouldn't even say from the intervention focus, but more from a theoretical perspective, trying to understand existential therapy. Because when we're talking about elements of like the four existential givens, like that's a really like, there's some things in there that behavioral interventions are not going to touch when we're talking about, the death and grief or, the sense of like isolation and feeling a deep sense of like, just, I am not connected and I'm brought into this world alone and I will leave this world alone. And behavioral intervention isn't going to touch that. So like being able to talk about the theories and being able to just give a point of reference. And I think this is a part of I hope this is part of every clinician's perspective. But one thing I really lean into is psychoeducation. So how do we have common language and common understanding of what we're working on? And I want you not to be an expert on, the neurology of what's going on, but I want you to understand like, what's happening here in this moment for you, and how can you then use that information to help again affect change? And so I really probably spend too much time making sure that we're on the same page in that psychoeducation piece. But I kind of frame it with my intake session. I'm like, we're going to do psychoeducation first. We're doing psychoeducation the entire time, but it's how they can really kind of take some of these theories and like, or even just knowing where to go with certain things. Like here's some great resources. Here's how you can digest this. And like, not to tell them this is the takeaway, but when I digest it, this is my takeaway. And here's why. Now you go and do this for yourself, not as a homework assignment, but when they're curious or asking about that. I think that's an important piece of like sharing how I interact and engage with material as well. So I kind of, I guess, moved a little bit away from that therapeutic approach, but I think that's an important part of my therapeutic process.
Yeah. But so I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, and I'll put myself on the spot too here. But like, how do you take all of that and deliver it in a sentence to somebody to understand your approach that's digestible? I think it's interesting. I think as therapists, we do these kind of, like we talk about the theories, but like I said, I'm CBT structured, blah, 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 but do people understand that? And so do you have a,
I don't, but I'll make one up and I'm going to, I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
I would say, once we identify the areas that you're attempting to develop change, I want to have shared and common knowledge and understanding and find finding techniques that you can implement effectively with low friction and exploring topics that feel overwhelming with structure.
I like that. Okay, that's good.
I'm sure there's a lot that I missed, but that psychoeducation, the existential piece of it, but also creating the routine piece, like that would be sure there's a better way of putting that. But
I say something like, and maybe I'm not even going to hit all of my points, but I kind of say something like, my approach is to focus on our connection so that I can understand your experience and how you think, feel, and react, so that I can help you find the best strategies and to determine if they're effective to meet your goals.
That was much better.
That's kind of I think about. It's like I'm thinking like, so again, what's important to me? Relational, CBT, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, integrative. There's no perfect strategy. Like let's find the best fit for you. And somehow progress monitoring, which I didn't say initially, but I think that's important. Like, how do we test to make sure that you do it and you see an outcome? So that's kind of where, I don't know. I want to listen back to that later, but that was off the cuff. But so let's jump in. So I've already kind of thrown out the relational piece, but like when we're talking about reflecting on ourselves as clinicians and our successes, what are the questions you ask yourself to reflect on the relationship or connection or alliance or whatever term we want to use therapeutically for yourself? Like, what are the factors you look at?
I would say like within the relationship side of things, it's finding ways of connection that I think, and I really think like that's almost where self-disclosure comes in of like, how can I relate to someone, if I'm able to self-disclose, if they notice that I have a ring on my, like, okay, hey, like, and I've had, hey, well, you're married, well, you can, and like, so I notice like that can create, a buy-in. I self-disclose on my bio that I have ADHD. And so oftentimes like, people come and be like, hey, like you have ADHD. Yes, I do. And so, I think creating alliances in that way where it's what are ways in which we can connect, as well as being able to, and I think you brought this up on air. Again, note to self, did you bring up the Facebook thing on air, or was that in our prior conversation? About the politics side.
I did. It was prior.
Okay. Just want to check in.
Prior.
And even for some topics that can feel really challenging, I try to then make that approachable. So right now, politics is a huge topic in sessions, and I'm questioned quite often, like, hey, well, what's your political line? And I typically will not disclose unless there's a good reason for it.
Right.
But I actually find myself typically disclosing to the individuals who I don't align with politically. And because there's almost this assumption at times, if I don't share it, it's like, oh, well, like, yeah, and I'm like, hey, like, this is just personal disclosure, but I don't. But do you notice how we can still have a dialogue, how we can still, being able to bring that awareness of like, it can help break down. So I think even the relationship can break down certain barriers, because there's individuals who have very, very strong beliefs that oppose my own beliefs. Yet we can work well together. We can laugh together, in a session, or we can like have some very vulnerable moments, and it can help to reframe some of those pieces. So I think finding opportunities to connect, whether that's in similarities or being able to acknowledge differences that still allow for there to be a sense of interactivity and connection that's there. And I think, there's, I feel like I've been on a roll of calling them out. I have some Penn State memorabilia, so I connect.
Right, you get that.
But even like there can like that can be a great way of. But being able to recognize like some of those pieces that can help make me more human, and in that making that human, I think that's what allows that relationship to thrive. So again, AI or like online has so much great therapeutic. But it's the humanizing of that and the distribution of that within the relationship, I think, that really can affect change. And there's a recent video I was watching, and it was a researcher who would just do little snippets breaking down research and just was really never getting any engagement, and he shared how there was a moment where he's like, all right, well, hey, I have to go and I have to make dinner for my wife. And he said that after that moment, he got so many comments of like, that made you a real person to me.
Wow. Yeah,
before I thought you were just opposing, but yeah, no, like that. I get that. Like, it's like, you're just doing this and now, here you are, you're not some, plant, or you're not, reading from a script. It's your person. And I think such an important part of developing that relationship is in a therapeutically appropriate way, making ourselves human in the session and being able to bring that human quality into it.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love the idea that you mentioned disclosure. And I know we did an episode, I think quite a while back, about the idea of disclosure, but there's a great book. Dear friend of mine, Ro Minuti and Andrea Bloomgarden, wrote a book called Therapist Revealed. And it's this whole idea of disclosure and kind of, again, how does that make us human, which I think's, important. Balance, of course, but I think that's definitely a part of my relational view. I also, there's things I look for is, I know I have kind of a sense of humor that isn't everybody's. So I got to pay attention to that. I think that's important. But I think humor is important in therapy, even in bad situations. There's an appropriateness sometimes. And I think that's something I've talked about before, the idea of authenticity. And I think this develops over time as well. But I know who I am. I know who I am as a therapist, but I also know who I am just as a person. And I think making sure that we stay true to who we are in an authentic way. I work with people of all ages. I don't try to be a cool teenager. I'm just never going to be. And that's okay. I have great relationships with teens that I see being me and respecting each other for who we each are different and being curious about, I just said something to someone today as a client. I just said, I'm just curious, what is it really like to be a teen today? And he kind of looked at me like this really weird question. He's like, why? And I'm like, I don't know. I was thinking for a second, I don't know what that's like. In all the stuff, all the chaos of the world, I'm just curious, what is it like for you to be a teen? And it kicked off this awesome conversation. And the funny part, honestly, he's not a difficult necessarily teen, but he can challenge me. And what was really cool was afterward, he went, man, thanks for asking that. And he's like, I wish my mom and dad would ask what it's like. They assume that they know. And he's like, no one's ever asked me what it was like. And I was like, wow, there was a relationship piece, that curiosity. So yeah, I think there's so many factors I think we could think of relational, but so the other kind of piece I want to just throw in here, contextual factors. And for me, what that kind of means, and this changes for me. It's reflecting on where I'm at in the moment in my practice. So there are times that I have to be aware of personal aspects of my life, the practice factors of my life, supervision parts of my life, and how that might impact my successes. And I'll self-disclose. I had, when my grandmother died many years ago, I didn't take grief clients for a little while. That was something where I had to go, you know what, that's not the right thing for me or for them. I was not in that right space. And I think it's important for us to realize where we're at. There were times as my kids were in certain developmental phases that I didn't work with certain groups. And it wasn't because I didn't feel clinically I was equipped, but I felt like, what, it's just not the right time for me to do that. So I think those contextual factors are another piece as we're thinking about our successes. What are things that we also have to be aware of that might inhibit that success? And I think, so where are we at in certain life factors?
And, especially I think for like day to day, that is constantly changing, but there's moments where that's going to be really significant. I think I mentioned this previously when Hurricane Ian hit Southwest Florida. My father stayed down there, and that was, and I share this now quite often, but that's a time when I really had to practice compartmentalizing. And during those, like the sessions I had during that day, that was something that was really a struggle. And there was an individual who's talking about a very similar thing. And I had to pull back from like, I wanted to really lean. It's like, no, that's for me. Like, and so even again, that self-reflection of like, not only necessarily who am I maybe restricting myself, but who am I maybe leaning more into in a way that's maybe not the most effective. And I mentioned this earlier, the Penn State side, and you're kind of like, tough time for that. And there's some clients that I have that they know that I'm a huge Penn State fan, and I have to be mindful of that because while I love to talk about Penn State, that there's only so much therapeutically that that we can get out of that, and and so there is this kind of like needing to self-monitor of what are my interests or what's going on that's going to pull those interests to the forefront. And again, there's times you can leverage that to be so effective, but I think even looking at the short-term piece of like what's going on even day to day that might be impactful. So I'm hoping in a few months, the context surrounding Penn State's going to change, but for right now, like when it's coming up, I have to be mindful of that. And like, I don't know, like it may be some silly things, but like they are things and like that are impactful that can, they can really influence moments that that are challenging. And another thing, and this is a self-disclosure as well, but I went camping here last weekend, and I didn't realize that I didn't have service, and I had a client who tried to reach out and I wasn't able to reach. So even like in that sense, and it's not that, we need to constantly be making but we need to be mindful of what's the effect that can have, because going back, like there's a sense of like, I hope that they didn't feel like I was dismissive of them. That was not the intention whatsoever. And we recovered and we restored, but there's an element of that is important to recognize that, when we are sharing like, hey, like if something's going on, reach out to me. And I don't see this client very often, but when they reached out, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so context, even of like be mindful of what we're offering, I think, in the context that we're kind of sharing that we're available and in that sense. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I was like, when you said that, I was thinking, that's, so I mean, as where I'm at in my phase of my career, I travel a lot, I present a lot, and my ability to be there for certain types of individuals that I actually enjoy and find great success with, I'm right now contextually not the right fit. So like my marketing right now is that I'm not going to take certain clients or people because my lifestyle and where I'm at in my practice phase of life is, while I could do it, I don't know that I could do it well. And I kind of feel like I owe that to them. Like, I know, like, I'm on the road 10 times in the next 6 weeks.
He's not joking.
I'm not joking. Like, I'm gone that much. And I'm like, wow, so like, I've had calls that come in and listen, I'm a narcissist. I know I can do well with that person, but I also know that contextually I owe it to them and to me not to put that in play and to kind of go, hey, you know what? I just can't at this time. And that's not to cherry pick patients, but it's to really honor that relationship and that responsibility. And so, if people look at my Psychology Today page now, it says like, I'm not currently taking new therapy cases and only doing evaluations. And that's just because right now I do have my therapy caseload, but I can't commit where I'm at in life. And I think that's important. And you're right. It can be a daily thing, but I kind of, and I've done this for a while. Like I kind of about every 3 months, kind of, that's a reflection for me. Like, where am I at? Like, are there factors in my life that have happened that would impact my success with certain individuals? And it's hard not to, like, there's because part of me is like, I want to do it because I do enjoy that work, but I also need to step back.
Yeah.
I think that's okay.
And to piggyback, and this, I'm going to bring it back to the short term here for just a moment, but I think one thing that we can do it to contextually as clinicians to really just kind of doing ourselves a favor, so to speak, is like when we're booking clients, when we have a more open availability and we can offer a few different time slots, look at who's before and look at who's after. And I know that there's times like some of those days, like when I'm talking about, like I walk in at like, because I have clients that I'm like, okay, they feed so well off of one another. My energy coming off one is gonna, and
it's interesting.
And at times it's like, okay, if I just had a really heavy session, maybe I need a session where we're doing more like, all right, here, we're going to take therapeutic games. We're going to try to make this. And it's like, okay, then after that, if it's that, like, okay, that's going to be kind of like repetitive. So I need something like, I want something that's going to have a deeper conversation or like something, and we can't always predict that, but being able to recognize even from a, hour to hour session, like what's the effect that context is going to have? And if I have, back to back heavy sessions, that takes a toll, and we have to recognize our bandwidth. And I think, we can't always control what we have available, but when we can, let's use that contextual awareness and help to tailor that to be effective.
But I do think that's again, great point. Like for me, where I'm at now is, I do probably 50% of my work, if not maybe a little bit more, is forensic. It's intense. It's thought provoking. It's mentally exhausting sometimes. And I know that I have to schedule my days a certain way. Like I think that awareness is, I think that's a great point, because we can't always control that. But like, I know, like if I have several forensic cases, I'm probably going to modify my schedule a bit to set a boundary that is going to let me have a schedule that I'm 100% plus in, and not going to be, burn out. If I'm testifying in court on a day, probably not doing therapy after. I think those are good awareness things that, yes, and again, maybe, for those that have full therapy caseloads, that might be about like, okay, I'm only going to see so many of a certain type of case in a day. Like I have a colleague of mine who does trauma work, and they only take a few trauma cases a day. And while they have a great expertise in it, they also understand that they're in it. They're in it when they're doing it. And if we don't have that feel that we're in it, maybe we're not doing as much as we think. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's a great point. So just kind of a last maybe factor we can hit really quick. I think this idea of also reflecting on the therapist factors, us, and I think we've hit some of these pieces, but our values, our true expertise, whole stuff that we've, that we really have mastered certain areas, like ADHD for you or whatever it may be. Like there's these areas. And I think also even our energy, I shared with Paul ahead of time here, but I had somebody, we're talking about like maybe how we're going to write stuff about or talk about ourselves, but even like our pictures, like if anybody goes to my personal website, I purposely took a picture that the photographer went, "Why do you want this picture?" And it's me with my arms kind of spread out, looking like a big personality. And it was thoughtful and intentional to do that, because sometimes I can be that. Like sometimes I can be that person. And it was interesting. I had a person who came in and said, I came to you because of that picture. Like it was like, you looked at it, it was like your energy in that picture. And honestly, that is the energy that I think I do most of the time. But I think being aware of that and knowing like I am not always the calmest person. I can come across in a certain way, but I took the picture because I want people to know that's who I am. Like if they think they're going to get somebody that's just going to be quiet and kind of nod, probably not that guy. And that's okay. Like I don't try to be something different. So for me, like those are some of the things I think about, like just kind of, I reflect on what's my energy like with people. How do I manage my values, my expertise in session?
And, to really, I think, piggyback off that, like it really is kind of this like know thyself perspective and focus there. And, when you're talking about the area of expertise, like this is a thought that came across earlier, but the idea of like, when do I no longer feel like an imposter? And I think that's a good question. And like, there's been times where I've sat through a workshop, like this is great information. And like, I go, I'm like, okay. When I go to like use it, I'm like, oh wait, what's that? Like that is not expertise. Like that is not, right. But when I can, map out like, all right, hey, from what you're sharing, I think this is where we're going to go. We can play, we can call some audibles, but like, this is my initial because of this. And it's not a like, the scripted, repeated thing. It's hearing where they're at and being able to then say, based off that, this is where I want to take it. And there's some things I always put in there. Like, again, that psychoeducation piece I think is imperative. But beyond that, if it's, okay, are we, what are we targeting based off of that? Like what, after we have psychoeducation and common language about executive functioning, what are the areas of executive functioning that we're going to be looking to tailor this response to? And what's going to create the most effective change based off what you're sharing here? And that doesn't come from just one workshop or one area. Like it comes from like really trying to like almost ask yourself, like, how well do I understand the principles and theory? Can I kind of trace this through thread line of how does that affect change? And why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing it because that's the next step in the book? Or am I doing that because I see the effect that it has and I can understand it and I can manipulate that in a way that's going to fit for the individual sitting across from me? And I think when we can start feeling that way about different theories or areas of training, like then we can start referring to ourselves as like, all right, this is something I feel confident. This is something I can, I can work to be a specialist in. And it doesn't have to be, I can't tell you the number of, grief and trauma trainings I've attended. And yet I do not feel like I'm a trauma therapist yet. Right. And so, it's not about the number of words. It's about how well we connect and we can utilize that information effectively. And again, I think it takes time as well. So I don't want someone who's, fresh out of school, like to be coming in, like, I need to find this immediately. It's, you gotta, know thyself. You got to figure it out first. And through some trial and error and exploration and self-reflection along the way. Yeah.
This is a great point. And I look at it as one, I want to jump back to, we should do an episode about imposter syndrome, because I do think that's we have not done that. And I mean, I think you probably said it and it probably rang a bell with many listeners. I've been doing this a long time. And there's times I go, wait a second, am I really the right person to be talking about this? Like, I think it's a real thing we face in our profession. And I won't disclose unless we do an episode, but I think that the part of me thinks there's a good part of imposter syndrome. There's a check and balance that comes in, and wait till the episode for that piece. But I think that's an important piece. And I think that the idea of expertise is, and again, I think sometimes we in our profession, we see trainings that say, hey, if you watch this workshop, you're a certified expert in blah, blah, blah. And I always have found that dangerous. And I kind of go, I know, and just because of time, what it took for me to truly feel like I was an expert, like where I really kind of went and it's a grind. like it's not a workshop. Like it's a lot of successes. It's a lot of failures. It's reflecting on these good things. It's also reflecting on the ones that didn't go well. And it's consulting and supervision and all of these dynamics that give us that expertise. And, I think if we're going to throw ourselves out there with whether it's a credential or just saying that we're an expert, how did we get there? And I think that's, I think that's important. And I think as it's easy to take a workshop and then go, yeah, I'm going to put on my Psychology Today bio that I'm a certified alien therapist. I don't know, whatever, extraterrestrial therapist, whatever it might be. Like there's, by the way, I did a whole other side story. I did get at one point a certification in that just because I did find a course that I took it and it was something interesting, but that's, there is actually a specialty in understanding abductions, people who have perceptions of abductions of extraterrestrial experiences.
There's a baffled look on my face.
Yes,
for you,
there is. That's a whole other episode. I was going to have two ideas, but no, kind of interesting. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think going back to the idea of, I see many people that write these marketing bios because they've attended a workshop and they put out the credentials, and then somebody comes to them and it's not as authentic of an experience as that person perceives. And as we're going to tie this back all to kind of marketing and all of these things here at the end, if we're not true to that expertise and the person, they're going to find us out.
Yeah.
I mean, they just are. And so it's sometimes we got to move beyond the vanity credential to prove ourselves. And I love when you talked about just disclosing the fact that you have ADHD. There's an authenticity to that. There's a different level of expertise and understanding that you have that maybe somebody else without it may not have. And I think the value in that type of statement of, listen, I have the skills as a therapist, but the other part is I have the experience as an individual who's faced those challenges, overcame some of those challenges, and maybe still have to deal with those challenges. I mean, I think, isn't that a better story? I mean, I think if I'm reading somebody's bio and I see that, I'm going to go, okay, that's better than a few letters after our signature block. That's a real thing. And I think that we don't do that enough. And I think as we talk about all of these factors, as we're writing bios and we're writing, things to kind of market who we are, I think that's part of what we have to do. How do all of these things come together to be our story as a therapist?
Yeah. And, for those listeners at home that have been following the podcast for a while, that's exactly why when we have an interview, but especially the Masters in Practice episodes, we ask, what got you into the field?
Yeah.
And, I think the episodes that stand out so strongly are when you hear the passion, when you hear the conviction, right. Or, for some, it's just kind of through dumb luck, but they capitalize on it. Yeah, and there's a connection that's deeper than just I don't know. Yeah. I just did. It's, I'm thinking of Aaron Brennan, who, again, kind of, I think he called out, he's like, I hope I have a top 5 story. And I would, the fact that I'm calling him out,
right. It's up there. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And, he talked about how his work in psychosis, he had no idea, it was not on his radar, yet through circumstance, he took risks, but he connected with individuals and he really leaned in. And I think, again, talk about authenticity. And when we're talking to those individuals, especially the Masters in Practice, you hear that authenticity in their story because it's their lived experience and what brought them into this. And I think when we as clinicians reflect on what is our story, what brought us into this, and if it's if it's ADHD, I lived ADHD, I didn't know what ADHD, was at a certain point. And it wasn't until, I was already, in the field. I'm like, this sounds so familiar. And then going through the process of getting it identified, I'm like, wow, what a difference it makes when you have interventions and supports like medication. And again, I'm quoting actually Dr. Ari Tuckman in this, but kind of grieving the life that could have been had I known earlier.
Yeah.
But it's, that then becomes a part of my mission. That's that authenticity of I want to support individuals to not go through their life experiencing that sense of, if I hear from a partner of it feels like you don't care. And deep down, they know that they care. They know they care so much, yet that care isn't translating into action or effective change. And why? Here's an answer that might fit for you. And how do we apply these techniques that are going to let you connect and let you demonstrate the care to the level that you feel it? Like in those moments there, like that sort of authenticity. And we want to convey that in a way that, it isn't just a check ADHD. That's what my population to work with.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, what a whole different view. I mean, I think as we talk about this idea of kind of reflective pieces on successes, I look at it as our success pattern should refine our marketing.
Yeah.
I think that's how we should use it. And there's other important stuff, and I dissed credentials to some extent, but I got enough letters after my name too. But it's but that's not I had somebody who asked why I don't have people call me doctor. Just not my story. It is, but it's not the most important part of the story, I guess. It's that kind of thing. So how do we refine our marketing? And I think the other piece is how do we use our successes to maybe refine our caseload? And, so kind of two different things. Maybe we're going to talk about the first one or the last one first. I look at this as, I think we have an ethical obligation to recognize when people aren't maybe the best fit for us, and to be able to say no. And not, again, it's not a cherry picking thing. I just know I'm not good at certain things, and that's okay. I'm perfectly fine to be able to say, I'm not the person to help with the success with that. I could probably get by. I could do certain things, but I think being true to myself in that way, to be I know, I don't take couples and haven't for a while. I know I'm not good at it. I just haven't. And I think knowing my successes help me then refine what I do focus on. So I think that piece of doing it to help, and I think this is marketing too, but to define what's the caseload that we're going to have continued successes with.
And as you were saying, I kept getting this visual of imagining a surgeon coming in saying hey, I don't know, I'm the best fit. I think we can get by, but I don't know that I'm the best fit.
Sure.
And if I'm sitting there and before surgery, that's not what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Or even the initial consult, we'll wing it. We'll give it a try. No, if I'm being, cut up on the table, I want to make sure that you feel here's what we're going to do. Here's the process. I want to know that the expertise is there and the confidence is there, not overly confident or not cocky, but confident and through experience, through that experience piece. And I do think there needs to be some flexibility we give because, if we need an expertise to market, then we're coming out of grad school. No one's ever working because they don't have an expertise refined. But as you are developing in your career, really looking at, who are you successful with, and making sure that that's a piece. And maybe who are you not successful with, and why? And is that something that, is that an area you're looking to develop and change? If so, okay, maybe they're not the bulk of your caseload then, but maybe we have a few that we're working with. But, so it doesn't mean we only pigeonhole ourselves, but I do think it means that we don't overextend, and we give a sense of confidence that, hey, at the end of the surgery, here's where you're going to be at. And, again, there could be complications, but if every surgery has a complication, I want to start questioning that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great way to look at it. And I think that as we do that, it does help us develop what our niche area is. And that doesn't mean that's all that we see. I mean, I've always been kind of blessed in the fact of I've gotten to work with a lot of different people with a lot of different kind of difficulties. But sometimes that did result in me not pursuing that further. And sometimes I still had the success with some clients and I continued, but it may not have been the niche area that I focused on.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up with like, I guess, how do we turn this all into maybe how we better market ourselves as clinicians?
And I think a part of that, like, that there will be check like that, for search filters for things like that. But I think it's really important to identify in, kind of how you put me on the spot. Like, what is that way that you explain that? Working to explain and express what our process is and, what someone can expect if they're coming and working with us in a way that, and workshop, get feedback from others, send it to loved ones, send it to individuals outside the field. Like, if you read this, what are you taking? Like, what's this person do? Like, what's that? And so getting outside interpretations, but I think really trying to, once we know our population, whether that is diagnostic, whether that is age, whether that is, groups or couples, being able to then express that level of expertise or even just, competency in a way that someone reading through your biography is going to say, I think this person's going to get it.
Sure.
And I think to your point earlier, also being able to convey self-disclosure in that personality. So, hey, if they are only looking for supportive talk therapy, you probably aren't that person. And that's a great thing for them to know because they're not wasting their time. They're not wasting your time. And they're going to be able to find someone who says like, hey, supportive talk therapy is my thing. All right. Let's connect with that. So it is just about like not casting such a wide net, but really refining and almost kind of having a finer mesh or filter to catch those that where we're casting our net, we're catching those individuals and we're pulling them in. And I think that comes from self-disclosure that they can connect with that relationship. It's sharing, your approach and how like what they can expect in session. Yeah. Maybe calling out, hey, if you're looking for this is who I am. Maybe even calling out some of the things you're not, I think could be a great way of also sharing that, but just finding ways of personalizing that. And the visuals I think are also crucial, as you mentioned. And not only I think the body language that we can express, but even, do we have photos of our office in there? And, I think that can be a really comforting thing of like, if someone walks in, they might, if someone's looking through, they might say, hey, you have toys on your, so that must mean you work with kids. Oh, hey, you don't have your overhead lights on, you have lamps. So, it's kind of like a bit more of a mellow experience and it's not these harsh, bright fluorescent lights in there. And being able to just kind of have that almost, what is the look and the feel that we're going for? That, and I think all of those pieces combine and really just try to paint this picture of who am I and what experience are you going to get if you, sign up or, come in for an intake. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that definitely we there's more than just the bio. I mean, I think that's super important. I looked at it as kind of, there's the bio piece. I think there's the elevator pitch. Like, how do you describe it? And I would say maybe elevator pitches, because I think sometimes we do have more than one hat. Like, I mean, I do therapy, but evaluations are a big part of what I do as well. So like, there's a different elevator pitch to that. But I think having that, and then I think, you mentioned the pictures. I think we also have to just call out, we are now in a digital world and I know everybody knows that, but most people come in, they know a lot about me before they ever come in anymore. Like, there's enough that you can search and there's a digital footprint that exists with work that I've done. And so I think also, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, but also like our message can be displayed in other ways. Like, Psychology Today now has a little video that you can put on that you can record, I think it's 30 seconds of yourself that people can hear you and see you and let you describe kind of what you do. That's important. My career's gone in a path where like I have other videos that people have interviewed me about how I got into psychology or why I've done certain things. And they're easily accessible. So I think we can have messages in a lot of different places. And now that's great. And, gosh, we know there's therapists out there doing a lot of stuff on social media now and good stuff. But also be aware that people know your social media and watch what you put, because there's a way that we can kind of do that. So, I think there's I think all of this we can tie into not just a bio statement, but how do we think of it from a way to make our story public to those who might want to use our service. So we're not just a name on a list of therapists. We're a person that people can decide if we're the right fit for.
And one more thing, we're a person that they can fit. And like that is such a crucial piece. And, I think that the theories are out there, but it's we as people that translate it and connect it with those that we work with. And so making sure that we're conveying that piece.
That's it.
And, with that, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.